Hi, welcome to Clarity 2020. This is Design Systems, or how I stopped fighting and learned to love the team. My name is Natalya Shelburne, and I'm a designer.
And I'm Tim Shelburne. I'm an engineer.
So when Tim and I met, we were still in school. We weren't in tech. I was studying art. He was studying math.
And then when we started our professional lives, jQuery was still a thing. Flash was still a thing. There were no iPhones. Natalya was teaching design and using Photoshop. I was touring as a musician, building band websites.
We've been collaborating for 16 years. And in that time, I've been his boss, he's been my boss. We've built apps, started companies, co-taught a Harvard Extension course. And along the way, we've shared opinions, stories, and the experiences we've had in tech.
As you can imagine, we've argued and we've disagreed all along the way. We're a married couple. But we're all in on design systems.
So, do design systems mean that we get to live happily ever after? No.
Yes.
It's complicated. Design systems are not a one-off that you can just put into practice and it's just that happily ever after. It's work and it's hard.
So why is it hard to work together? Because in tech, you hear all these stories of unicorns and other fairy tales.
You get the cliche. Engineers are not able to be creative. You get the designers don't want to be confined to a system. And those are just really boring binaries that are just completely arbitrary. As an educator, I know that that binary is a myth. People are and should be multidisciplinary. You shouldn't call people unicorns when they're pretty good at two things.
So you see, design and engineering, it's not your identity. That's just a set of skills that anyone can acquire by putting their time and energy into learning them.
It's hard at that intersection. Whether you call it a gap or an intersection of skill, the truth is that we're constantly stepping on each other's toes. Decisions that seem completely inconsequential to me have real consequences for Tim.
And I've completely broken her workflows by trying to make big engineering decisions.
And the advice you get is you should sit next to each other. There's lots of bad advice like that, like maybe you should be best friends and hang out and really just try to sync up, be on the same page. But look, we're here to tell you that even true love and being married and living together and quarantining together is not enough. You need a system. We use a system. Instead, people in tech are set up to fail. It's no surprise that the dynamic between designers and developers is just this like adversarial legend, right? Because we're constantly held accountable for the actions of the other. We're repeatedly pit against each other at crazy deadlines, and we're often told that we have to solve these problems on the individual level when the problems themselves are in fact team problems. We receive little to no organizational support and we're left on our own. It can get so stressful that we start to buy into the fairy tales. We give up on working with the people we are in front of, and we start believing in this mythical person, this mythical designer, the perfect person who will one day understand me, or this perfect engineer who will never say no, who will never shut down my ideas. And that's just not how it works. The truth is, the grass is greenest where you water it.
Individuals can't overcome a team problem. It's a dynamic between the members of your team, and there's nothing that you can do as one person to suddenly overcome this. So when we needed a system, when we needed a design system to help us work as a team, we needed it to help us align as, instead of you versus me, us versus the problem.
So let's take a look at us. Take a look at this intersection of skill and the work ahead, a very simplified chart of the ecosystem, right? So when you look at this, you could reach some really easy but very wrong conclusions like, well, the designer just needs to learn to code, or the engineer just needs to like go ahead and figure out how to do design decisions. And maybe you might find like organizationally we should just like sit them as closely together as possible, and that way they'll start collaborating. But looking at it as us versus the problem, you have to zoom out. You have to look at the ecosystem of us and the work ahead of us. So it's us versus the problem. So embrace the strength-based approach. Embrace the skills people have and work from their strengths, which is like really cool. How do you do that, right? Like how? That's great advice. You keep hearing that. But how do you do it? Well, use the zone of proximal development. Lev Vygotsky, a sociocultural psychologist, defined this term to mean the difference between what you can do as an individual left to your own devices versus what you can do with guided or expert help. It's the difference between what you can do guessing randomly and just trying things and what you can do when you're following some well-documented resources. How can you take advantage of this proximal knowledge, the stuff that's just right out of your reach? Well, you can, as a team, assess the knowledge, the prior knowledge and skills of your teammates. You can evaluate where they are now, what's just out of reach, and then once you identify those proximal skills, you should build tools and resources to elevate them to be in that zone of proximal development. So that could be tools, abstractions. It could be an apprenticeship where you set up a peer coding program or a peer co-working program, opportunities to practice the skills and learn and grow into them. Design systems are awesome for proximal knowledge development. They're a tool for productivity at the team level, and they are able to augment individual contributions and augment individual learning. So how does that happen? You can use design systems to abstract mental models. Now, I want to be clear. This is not just saying, I'm going to write down how to do my job, and I'm going to give you a step-by-step list of what to do. When I say abstract mental models, I mean you are literally helping others make decisions as well as you can without having to learn everything you know, not limiting them to just following directions. You want to encourage them to use the skills and the knowledge that they have. So it's a documentation as a framework for better decisions. Prior knowledge, educational resources, whatever you're doing, it has to be custom for the person that you're creating it, for your team. And that goes the same for tools for collaboration. You need to figure out how to create prototyping spaces so that they actually enable people to prototype and validate ideas faster, not slow them down. How to create tools for transparency into the code for people who may not code so that you're not hindering their ability to collaborate or contribute, but you're instead, again, engaging that proximal, just out of reach skill or contribution and allowing them to do it. And ultimately, what you're looking to do is use a design system to empower on a team level, not just the individual level. You can have different kinds of people contributing and collaborating, and you can stop thinking about what people are missing, and you can start thinking about what people are bringing to your team. And that's a huge shift in thinking to make, because you want to step away from the rock stars, the bottlenecks, the gatekeepers, whether they are intending to or not. And you can start moving away from the adversarial dynamic of defensive behaviors, and you can start highlighting and growing the expertise that people are bringing to share on your team. We need to use design systems to share our superpowers.
So Natalya has been talking about augmenting the people on your team, making it such that you cover a wider breadth of the problem set in any given problem domain. But I'd also like to talk about enabling yourself and others to go deeper and do more individually. And technology should do that. Technology is meant to support people. It's not just software. So, for example, when Natalya supports me, I want to be able to build out a UI without necessarily having to understand every aesthetic decision that went into creating this design system. I want to be able to just use those component pieces without having that mental model. And likewise, when I support Natalya, she wants to be able to work without understanding every little intrinsic detail of the mechanics necessary to make it work. She doesn't want to deal with Webpack. She doesn't want to deal with build scripts. It's not necessary, unless maybe you do. Yeah. So design systems externalize your expertise, and it reduces the cost on individual members of your team.
So what does that actually look like? You may have heard the advice, fill your bucket with big rocks first. It's a metaphor to kind of say, hey, fill your day, your work with the important stuff, and then the smaller tasks like pebbles and sand, you can fill around that. Because if you start with filling your day with sand and the little things and the day-to-day things that just take your time up, you won't actually have space in your bucket for the big things, the odd-shaped things. That's cool and all, but how does that actually work in this situation with design systems?
How? Well, we need less sand. So in this metaphor, sand represents those little tasks that take time and energy away from the big creative decisions. So with tech, we can automate the sand away. So as an example, as an engineer, I want to create repeatable dev workflows where with minimal effort and minimal thought, I can recreate the same situation again and again and again. I want to create versioned tools and clear usage documentations so that your libraries are usable over and over again in the same way. Additionally, I want to create continuous integration and continuous deployment workflows that make it easy for the system to be published and to be released to the world at large and to anyone who's interested on the team. But it's not just from the engineering side. What about the design side? So from the design side, you need to make design decisions explicit. This is what a design system is. It says, here are the pieces of our system, and here are how they work. You want to create visual regression testing that takes you back and allows you to look at design decisions from a reliability standpoint as well over time. And then you also want to create clarity of intention. So when we talk about sharing mental models and enabling someone else to use your mental model, I don't want to wonder what the intention of some component or some piece from a design system is. I just want to use it and know that I'm working within the bounds of what's reasonable and expected. So design systems are really the tools that allow one person to achieve the results of another without having to do the mental overhead to learn the mental model of that other person.
A lot of really talented, awesome people are at odds right now, having really frustrating arguments like the ones we've had over our years of collaboration. And it just doesn't have to be that way. It could be really good. It could be fun and awesome collaborating together. The result of a well-done design system should be more time to do meaningful work and a whole lot less defensive behaviors about the skill gaps you may have on your team.
So with design systems, you can use time better, contribute more, and then once you feel the momentum, you'll just be bought in.
But of course, before you go all in on everything that we've just said, we have to raise a red flag. Ask yourself, what happens on your team when somebody disagrees? Is there fighting, steamrolling, gatekeeping, back-channeling, escalations to people who don't need to be escalated to?
Yeah.
Are bad actors on your team being held accountable when they are discovered to be bad actors? If the answer to any one of these is not the answer you want, pretty much everything we're saying isn't gonna work. Like in any relationship or partnership, you can't make somebody see your value if they're determined not to see it. You can't make somebody like you. You can't make somebody want to collaborate with you. You can't make somebody respect you. This is your official permission to leave, flee, or do whatever you have to do if somebody is not coming to work with you in good faith. This is only for good faith collaboration.
See, a design system will do little for teams and organizations that don't hold bad actors accountable. Basically, a design system isn't a replacement for soft skills. It's not a replacement for organizational structures that encourage empathy, respect, and trust. If you don't have those three things, there's no system you can put on top of your team that's suddenly going to make it productive and healthy.
But if you do have trust, respect, and empathy, what else is possible? I kind of want to sell it. Everything. Absolutely everything. For me, as a designer, it feels like that you're constantly getting the rug pulled out from under you. You know, my tools are changing. CSS is either scoped or not scoped or in modules. The workflows that I've developed over these years, I've just had to keep changing and adapting because they change for me. Somebody sets up a system and I have to adapt to it. And so for me, the ability to come to somebody setting up a system, a workflow, or something that I have to work in, and being able to say, this isn't working for me, here's what I need, and how can we make it better, is an incredibly important thing for you to be able to do. So for example, with us, the first time we used Storybook together, it was like, cool, I see all these components, these buttons, everything has its own little home in this little corner, and I can see every single thing, one after the other. I want to see all of them mashed together in once in one giant artboard, and when I change a border radius, I want to see what it does to everything. I'm working on theming, and I want to see what the fonts and the border radius and the inputs all change together. I want that. And you know what the answer should be? Why not?
Yeah. So to kind of jump off from what Natalya is talking about, after Natalya and I started working through discovering these patterns and practices and workflows and everything that's bound up in making a design system work, I took those discoveries back to my job. So when I was a co-founder of a company here in New York, I had a designer who was particular about what she wanted. And I was so used to being one of those engineers who says, no, this is inconvenient, or no, this is impossible. We need to do something differently because that's ultimately what's going to be effective. But this time I paused. I just took a minute. And so this is a message for the engineers out there. When someone tells you that they need something, just listen and then consider how big of an impact is it really going to have for me to follow what they're asking for and just do it. And so when I did that, all of a sudden it opened up our team to all kinds of new possibilities. We ended up with a true design system back when it was this new hip thing, and we fell into it not because we went and installed Storybook and said, here's the standard practice that you need to follow, but instead because it was just the answer that you come to when you trust and consider and respect your teammates. So the reality is, if someone tells you that they're blocked or that things are slow, don't consider that, charity to go in and fix it or something. It's an incentive to fix it because that makes your team effective.
Because at the end of the day, it really is us versus the problem. If you've got a style guide, if you already have these design systems, you're using design tokens, whatever, you're bought in, what can you do? Work on us. That is also a lot of work you should be doing. So get to know each other better, ask more questions, ask twice as many questions as you're currently asking. How well do you really know the people you're working with? Have you asked, what tools do you like using? What tools are we using now that you don't like using? What's something that takes a long time that you are just really not happy doing? What are the expectations on you? What's your job? What are you accountable for? Is the current workflow we have working for you? How is it working? How is it not working? You should also unsilo yourself, spice things up, go to the wrong conference. One of the most fun things that Tim's done in his career is go to way too many CSS conferences with me, and that's opened up his mind about the way that he thinks about things as an engineer. And it's also good advice to try new things together. You can make your partnership and collaboration way more fun if you actually try to do the new tools and new frameworks and new cool hot things in technology together. Try Storybook together, try TypeScript together, try these different integrations for Sketch or Figma or whatever technology you're using. Get in on design tokens if you haven't already, and if you haven't started using CSS Grid,
what are you doing?
I don't know. And figure out animations. Those are all really fun things to work on together and learn together. Instead of feeling like you're behind, you can work on it together and learn above average learning because you're leveraging each other's skills in that proximal zone of development. And then make sure you set explicit expectations about what you're doing. For example, when you're brainstorming, if you're bringing in the designer who is supposed to diverge and come up with many ideas, don't bring an engineer and not tell them that that's what you're doing, because they're going to come in and converge, as their job is to say, oh no, let's limit and narrow in scope. So make sure you know what page you're on, say it out loud, and be explicit. Us versus the problem means you're working on the same goals and solving the same problems, but in your own unique ways.
And it's also important when you're defining us versus the problem, well, who is us? Is it just the designers on your team? Is it just the engineers, that group of two kinds of people? I mean, probably not. If you really want to be effective, you need to include marketing. You need to include sales. You need to include product and the business side, because everyone contributes and everyone is part of making everything better. So when you're solving a problem for one person on the team, the truth is you're helping everyone. A rising tide lifts all boats.
The truth is that design systems are a commitment. They take work, but they are the foundation of your partnership. We've been married for
several years.
Many years.
Years.
And the truth is the fairy tale of effortless partnership is not real. You have to put in the work, and a really great way to do that is to use design systems as a foundation.
So enable each other, reduce work for each other, and avoid bad people.
Thank you so much. You want to say it in the wide?
We just fist bump, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalya, Tim, that was awesome. And I think this is the first Clarity Talk with a duo, not to mention wife and husband duo. Thank you for that. How are you both? I have some questions for you.
Cool.
The first one is, did you both hear about the chameleon who wouldn't change color? He had a reptile dysfunction.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh.
I'm going to have to tell my kid that one.
Yeah.
Maybe wait a couple of years. All right. So Natalya, you mentioned something a little bit earlier. You said, people give a lot of bad advice about collaborations and how to work together. They say dumb things like, just sit together. I tell you, I am guilty of giving that advice a lot too. And part of the reason that I give that advice is that I find that teams don't sit together a lot. But I think you make a really good point in that, it can't just be sit together, right? It can't just be sit together and then all of the magic will happen there. Do you see teams being able to sit together and then actually nothing good coming of that? Is that partly why you give that advice to say don't stop there?
So it's kind of like the bad advice is really similar to relationship bad advice, and that's where you see this kind of metaphor coming out. It's like sit together is right there with people who don't notice when the dishes are clean, so they just assume they magically get clean. It's one of those things where it's just it's like the correlation. It's like if you sit together, sometimes it works. So I guess let's just keep sitting people together more. It's not the proximity. It's the fact that people are doing this invisible work and going, okay, I guess we have to figure out how to make this work, or I'm fired. And so a lot of people step up all the time, daily, and in so many organizations. And it's like, why don't we actually just, instead of the sitting together and really see what do they do to make it work, and then amplify and support that? It's wild. I know this is crazy cutting edge stuff, but here we are.
Yeah, right. There's a great question in the chat, and I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I think that's what makes it fun. So I'm going to lob it out there for the three of us, and just curious to see how you reacted. Sarah asked a question. She says, can we have a universal web design system?
Yes.
How do we do that?
I don't know. I'm an engineer. That's for you guys to figure. Dan, you figured that out, man.
Oh boy. All right, cool. You mentioned something in the talk. You said, and both of you kind of talked about this, that design systems reduce the cost for individual members of the team, right? So you don't have to transfer a full mental model to everyone for them to be able to understand what to do. That requires a lot of trust, though. How do you go about building that kind of trust with your collaborators and with your partners and with people on your team to say I don't really get exactly what you're doing, but I'm going to do my part of that anyway. That's got to be built on a foundation. So how do you build that up?
I have so many answers. First of all, let's just accept that it's pretty absurd to ask the design systems people at your company to figure out how to build trust in general. It's just such a big thing, Some of the things I like to say is raise the bar for emotional intelligence on your teams. It's not you can't opt out of whole aspects of your job. So saying I don't do people or soft skills, or I don't really, I want to just do my thing at my computer. That's just such a low bar to hit. To be able to say be a person who can be counted on, who can communicate clearly and well and at the appropriate times. Because all trust is when you say a thing, I can trust that it will then match up with your actions. And building that just seems like a human thing we should be able to have, but of course we don't.
Well, I think also structurally, the point of having an employer, the point of having a design system, the point of having these structures in place is to reduce the risk and the cost on the individuals. So when you're in an employer-employee relationship, you shouldn't be stepping into this relationship with other employees thinking, can I trust this person? That's pretty indicative of a really unhealthy environment. You should just trust them by default. And then when that trust doesn't work out, you figure it out. But build bigger structures around it. Don't count on all of these individual people to be individually accountable for every single problem that happens at the company.
The organization has to have your back.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, you cannot, like we said on the talk, an individual cannot overcome a structural or organizational problem. And to say that if you just sit closer, you could is just the biggest lie ever. Because to really say, like, what behaviors are being encouraged at your organization? What happens when somebody doesn't deliver or doesn't communicate? Is there any consequence? If not, then you'll never have trust, because there are no consequences to actions. So I would say the first thing to examine isn't like, how can I make this individual trust me? It's more like, what happens when somebody does something bad?
Well, and let's
impacting in a negative way, whether they intend to or not.
and let's go back. The original question was about, we're transferring mental models, right? Which to me, to say I'm counting on this person to transfer their mental model because I need to be able to work within the same system they work within, that shouldn't be a high stakes question. So like that should be, well, we build this tool until it works and does the thing. So let's, instead of approaching it necessarily just negatively, from the positive, let's say we have a system that establishes some degree of trust, where you say like, hey, I trust the system, not the trust in the person, but I trust this system to represent the mental model of my coworker. So I can use this system and feel with relative confidence that I'm going to be working according to what they've intended. If you suddenly find that that's not the case, it shouldn't be this like big deal, or what are we going to do? Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Like, accountability flows both ways. You just say, look, we need to fix the system. Fortunately, we have a system in place, so we can just iterate on the system. I mean, we're all familiar with this terminology.
Just a small follow-up question on that. Is trust one of those things that's like everyone's job, or like the organization's job, or like the people ops or HR department's job? Like, who's responsible for that? How do you hold someone accountable, who's responsible for it?
I would love to say we could solve it. But I think just to zone in on the part that has to do with design systems, what we keep saying is externalize your expertise. So my story is that the first time I realized I'm a bottleneck, because I'm like, I'm the CSS person. You come to me when you need something. Like, that feels good. It feels so good to be somebody on your team who's like, I'm an expert. And then I had to go on parental leave and hand everything off. And suddenly I realized, like, if this runs on my steam and I step away and it falls apart, I've built absolutely nothing. I am a bottleneck. I'm the reluctant gatekeeper who doesn't want to be, but I'm stopping everybody from being able to do this. And in fact, by owning that piece, I made sure that nobody else learned it either, because I was like, I got it. I'm so happy to be useful and helpful. And so taking what I knew and realizing I can't write all this down and nobody will ever read this. The amount that is in my head needs to be simplified and abstracted into a decision framework, so that other capable people, the people I work with, are capable and awesome and clever and can make good decisions. And if I just help them have a framework for making decisions that helps to contribute my expertise, that's kind of what we're talking about. So it's really, the trust here is that I trust them to make good decisions. I trust their skills, and not say like, you need to follow this exact list, exactly like this. These are your constraints. Don't step outside of it. It's instead saying, I trust that you're a capable, creative individual who could do this.
Awesome. There's a great question in the chat that kind of follows up on that from Sonia. So Sonia asked, how do you create a culture of collaboration rather than a culture of teams needing constant design system guidance and help and support? How do you build that collaboration? I imagine it's related to kind of what you were talking to about being able to trust that other people have the skills to be able to contribute as well.
Sorry, I don't quite understand the distinction between the two. It kind of sounds like the second half of that kind of described a culture of collaboration.
Oh, interesting. Can you say more? So you see like needing the design system as part of the collaboration, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think of at the startup that I referenced in the talk, when we created this design system, it became a central point of contact for a number of different teams. So it wasn't just how do designers come in and use this with Figma, or how do engineers come in and copy and paste code into React apps. It was, how does sales come in and look at this for branding purposes? How does the business come in and measure the success of being able to build apps quickly against having the design system? How does marketing come in and create marketing materials based on the branding guidelines that we put out there? It was literally a central hub for everything representing brand questions and design and product questions. And so to me, like, I don't know, perhaps I misunderstood the question, but to me, it sounded like, how do we keep people from having to come to us and ask all these questions, or how do we make it so that they can just contribute? And I don't think that's reality. I think reality is this is the system that you set up to make those conversations possible with healthy accountability, so that everyone can look at it and say, hey, we're all on the same page. We just want to like make this thing good. And we're all just people sitting around this table, like trying to find the best way to do that.
Awesome. Tasha's got a question in the chat too. She says, what are some examples of accomplishing with expert guidance / zone of proximal development? Do you have any examples of accomplishing that?
Lots. I mean, I think one of my favorite I love React. I love what JSX does in that it could have looked like any kind of syntax, but it's intentionally looks like anybody who understands and has a mental model of HTML can open up a file. If somebody says like, you go here to this one file, JS, right between here, don't touch anything else, but write your HTML, go nuts, like make it great the way you want to, but like don't write above this line. So I think that's a really great example of taking something and making it intentionally fit another person's mental model or translate nice. It's like all you have to do is camel case class name. Sorry, like that's a thing. Don't ask why. That's a whole talk. But it enabled a whole lot of people to contribute.
Yeah, awesome. You both mentioned that, and you mentioned this earlier in the Q&A too, that good collaborations or great collaborations are built on good faith. And I love that you gave people permission to flee, right? If it is a toxic environment, I'm a big fan of giving people permission to do stuff that they would do normally on their own anyway. Sometimes they just don't. So someone has to say to them, you get to do this. There's a flip side to that though, which is that what if somebody can't do that? What if they're just not able to, because they don't have the privilege to be able to, they feel stuck there, they are stuck there. Do you have any advice for just making it work when you don't have the ability to flee?
There's this, when they were saying like go on the roller coasters, but because of coronavirus, they're like screaming your heart. I don't know why that popped in my head just now, but it's more like stop. Like if you just stop thinking that people are going to change, and if you just think like maybe if I just do something, twist myself into a shape to make myself a certain way, people will finally start like, I just need to do this or that. Like you're on this endless, impossible goalpost moving run. Really, if you're just able to see the situation for what it is instead of what you wish it was, your life will get a lot better. I mean, it's not like you have to flee physically by quitting your job, because I understand not everybody has that ability, especially in this pandemic, but mentally flee in your head from flee in your heart, and realize that your situation, see it for what it is, and you can't change the other person. There's more relationship advice. You can't change anybody. So the advice there is, you can't change anybody.
Nice. How about recommendations on books? Josh asked in the chat, are there any books that you recommend for teams to read?
Sapiens. It's a long one, but I don't know. I think it breaks things down into a very practical and humanistic thing that it kind of forces you to think about things from more perspectives. And ultimately, I think that's a lot more important than what tech books you read or what, Harvard Business is putting out about management. I don't know. People, stuff that makes you feel empathetic and think about people.
I would say everything outside of tech. So I majored in not computer science.
Except your books, right?
Yeah. Oh no, just only the things I like. For example, one of the things that like I have on my shelf that I just love referencing a lot it's called Sensation and Perception. So if you enjoy anything about color theory, but you also want the intersection, like how do your eyeballs work and why do we
anything, right? Like for anybody who's like, I'm an engineer, should I read more engineering books? It's like, read this. I'm a designer. It's like, you want to see how human eyeballs work so that you can design for that. So reading psychology books, whether they're for the more kind of like behavioral psychology or just straight up like how does our brain work stuff is really, really fascinating because, we focus so much on computers, but it's really all about people, and learning more about people is awesome. So I'd recommend that.
Awesome. Maybe two more questions, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. So Pavitra asks in the chat, in what ways can we turn bad actors into good actors instead of turning them away? Is that possible? And how can we get bad actors excited to contribute more?
Have you succeeded at that?
I just said you can't change anybody. I can tell you this. There is no person who's just so talented but toxic that's worth all of the people they're going to turn away who are talented and awesome. Like, there are so many talented and awesome people you can work with today who are not going to, like, you're not going to have to be like, but what about this thing where they're really awful? It's like, one way I can say if you are an organizational leader, ask yourself, how do we hold people accountable, and what behaviors are we explicitly encouraging and supporting and rewarding in our organization? So if you're saying we love collaboration, but your career ladder doesn't actually reward any of that, what do you think is going to happen? If you're an organization where there is absolutely no way to kind of resolve a conflict when two people are in a disagreement who are laterally maybe equals, and there's no way to resolve a disagreement, you're probably going to get back channeling or steamrolling or any of those other things. So people are like, I need to just be able to do my job. And they'll find their own kind of not so great answers. So.
Awesome. Last one for you both. You kind of, toward the end of your talk, you close it by saying, if you got the components, you got the tech, you got the design, you got all that stuff, work on us. That's the thing to work on. Do you have any tangible recommendations, practical suggestions for what does work on us mean in relation to a design systems team or people that work on a design system?
You're nodding a lot.
I'll start. So work on us. I think the big picture, is sit down and think about not just think about. So it's not any one individual's responsibility to say, here's how we're going to do this thing. Everyone needs to sit down and contribute to this conversation. But have the people in your team talk about what their real skill set is. And not just what their skill set is currently, but what they'd like it to be, what they don't want it to be, what they have experience with and what they have experience with but don't want to do anymore. Because a lot of us are in that situation. And instead of saying, what does it mean to say, I want to hire a designer? That means so many different things. Or I want to hire a front-end engineer. No one knows what that means anymore. But instead, if you have an explicit list of skills or you have an explicit list of tools that you're familiar with, or you have certain ways that you think about things that can contribute to a team as a whole, make a list of those things and find the places that you don't have covered as a team. Because whatever those holes are in what you can and can't do, those holes are the things that you need to figure out. You need to find a way to either hire someone or educate someone on the team or create a tool that does it for you, or, it all depends on what that question is. But I think it really comes down to an audit of sorts of what your team is good at collectively.
And you have to look at it as a team. Like when you say us versus the problem, it's like, this is our team, we're building products. No individual is not good enough or deficient or anything, because otherwise you're setting yourself up to fail if you're at any point pointing a finger at somebody and saying, you don't know enough X, so we need that perfect designer, a perfect engineer. You're wishing for somebody who doesn't exist to come replace this person in front of you who, no, you have to look at the team, shift to a strength-based approach, and think about what everyone's contributing, and stop, if somebody's in there but you don't know this, just stop them. Just say, don't say those things, be quiet. Let's talk about what we're all bringing, where we can have an opportunity to bring somebody else in, or grow our skills. It should be a good thing. It should be a positive thing. And it's hard because it is tied to our income and our ability to survive in the world. And that's what makes the stakes so high. It can't just be fun, but it doesn't have to be awful.
I love that. Natalya, Tim, thank you so much for that great talk. I can't think of a better way to end day 2 of Clarity. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.